You practice martial arts or intend to practice martial arts and you're looking for the right mobility exercises for your hips and your lower body. They're gonna help you advance your fighting style, become faster, stronger and more resilient, reducing your chances of getting injured during a fight and outside of a fight. Mobility for martial artists. We'll be focusing on our lower body mobility, but we'll also add the tiniest bit of upper body mobility just in case, just to make sure that you're getting the holistic exercise routine that you deserve. Mainly when it comes to our lower body or hip mobility, we want to focus on extension, flexion, as well as rotation. So if you're ready, let's go and have some fun. Now to start you out with something very easy and very simple, we will sit down on one foot, keep one leg fully extended, and all I want to do from here is use our leg musculature and our posterior chain musculature to push us forward into a lunging position, lengthening our hip flexors on one side, strengthening our extensors on the other side, and then pushing backwards, sitting down fully, and reversing the entire movement. If your range of motion is too short to sit down fully, or your ankles aren't limber enough to give you this space to sit down, you can put your hands on the ground and switch from here. Push forward, bring your knee as far forward as possible without your heel leaving the ground, because we're working on that ankle flexion as well, and then reverse back here. You don't have to sit down all the way for now, but over time your range of motion, as usual, is going to increase, and then we can sit down fully. Now we can start adding some rotational mobility as well as control to this movement by sitting down on both legs, extending backwards, turning forward, going into our lunging position and reversing the entire movement. External rotation in our hip, pull in, sit down completely and reverse with complete internal rotation, long movement, push forward, reverse and sit down. So now we've combined rotational mobility with our extension. Now we're gonna go even a step further by adding hip flexor strength, not only hip extensor strength. So we're gonna start out right here, extend backwards, internal rotation, going the full movement this time, crossover, reverse, move forward, reverse, come back up, flex your abdominals, flex your hip flexors and your quadriceps, extend that leg, put it down and reverse the entire movement. So now we're adding a little bit more complexity to our movements, which is very important when it comes to martial arts training in general, because most of the movements that we do in martial arts are really complex, especially the further we advance, and being able to string together multiple movement patterns that work on your mobility as well as your strength is absurdly helpful when working on your martial arts progress as well. Reverse, sit down, flex. You can hold statically for a second or two. We need a lot of stabilization from our core, which is an immense bonus also when working on our mobility. Down and reverse. Let's go through it one more time. Extend backwards, internal complete rotation, back to the front, push forward, lengthen your hip flexors and your quads, push back, elevate to flex your hip flexors and your abdominals and your quads, and then reverse in external rotation and move back into our starting position. Of course, don't forget to do both sides. Next up, whatever martial arts you practice, you have to be at the very least limber and loose enough to get down into a deep squat or a resting position and be able to sit down here for a longer period of time. Now keep these things in mind. If your heel raises, like so, when sitting down into a deep squat, that means usually that you don't have enough mobility in your ankles, and you can test that easily. If you push your knee forward and your heel starts raising, the more you move forward, you can't bring your knee further forward than your toes. That means you need to work that ankle flexion and extension. So check out this video so you can work on your deep squat, and we will move on because this is our starting position for the coming exercises. Now you have to be very strong when it comes to internal rotation in your hip joint, but we also have rotational force on our knee. Even though our knee is not a rotational joint, we are still turning our leg inwards and outwards, and we have the tiniest bit of external rotational force on our knee, which means that we have to condition our knee to get used to those forces so we do not get hurt. We can do that easily by combining this internal rotation from one side to the other at level 1 with internal and external rotation on both sides this time. So this is called the 90-90 squat switch. Basically, you're in deep squat position, you're gonna sit down to a 90-degree angle in both legs, which usually means that you have to open up here more, but the closer you pull in, the more we can work on our ankle extension, which as mentioned before is very important. We're also stretching our tibialis, lengthening our leg musculature, and then we're gonna use our hip flexor and abdominal strength to sit us up and switch into the other direction. Now we're gonna add level number 3. Many of you have already seen this. If this is not your first time on this channel, we're gonna go internally on the right side, externally on the left side, and now we're gonna add spinal rotation in our lumbar and thoracic spine by turning our upper body as far as we can to the side and trying to bring our face all the way down to the ground. Now we're lengthening our obliques, lengthening our hip flexors, strengthening our extensors by pushing forward, and we're also limbering up our lower back, which is gonna help us with hip mobility in the long run. Internal rotation on one side, external rotation on the other side. Sit down fully, bring your face down to the ground, go through that stretch, and then use your own strength to pull yourself up into that deep squat position. You're gonna notice this switch is basically the hardest part about these exercises, because we need a lot of strength in our hip flexors, in our adductors, and in our leg musculature in general, but mostly we need a lot of control and enough flexibility to pull us into a resting squat position from a seated position. So this is usually a movement that you have to work on if you want to be strong when it comes to kicking, if you want to be flexible enough to have a longer range of motion, and if you want to reduce the chances of getting injured in your training or sparring sessions. Now the next exercise is usually conflated as a strength exercise, but it requires way more mobility and control than it will ever require strength, and that would be the pistol squat. Basically from a seated position with your legs completely extended in front of you, your upper body completely extended. We want to pull one leg in, and now comes the hard part. The hardest part about the entire pistol squat is just the switch from this position to an elevated position, because this requires a lot of strength in your hip flexors, in your adductors, and in your lower abdominals, as well as enough flexibility in your entire posterior chain to be able to pull you with your upper body forward from here and to keep this leg up here instead of falling down. So before you get into the pistol squat itself, you have to learn the switch from fully seated to elevated. Fully seated to elevated. And I would recommend just practicing this small part of the movement is already absurdly effective in working on your hip flexor strength, as well as your posterior chain mobility, and your core is getting worked insanely. And only once you've learned this, now we can switch from the elevated position into the extended position, adding our core strength. And we want to try and touch the ground with our legs extended to add a little bit more flexibility, but mostly to add balance to our exercise. Elevate, extend, reverse, sit down, and repeat. I have a full guide here. If you want to take it step by step, check it out. It'll help you get into the pistol squat mindset instantly. Now, last but not least, this is more of an ability more than anything else, and it requires a lot of mobility as well as control, and that is being able to get into a deep squat position and consequently into a standing position from any position you are in. If you're a martial artist, if you're a grappler, if you're a fighter, you will be forced to take the fight down to the ground, and being able from here to either switch into a deep squat position like so, or of course from the laying position, for instance, into a standing position can be very effective to help you get out of some sticky situations, as well as advance your mobility, strength, and control in general. You should be able from any position to switch it up into a standing one, or a squatting one, or a kneeling one, whatever you feel like, but you have to have the control to get into all of these positions from any point in time and any space on the ground. And once you can do that, now you will be able to advance your mobility, advance your strength, and through that, advance your fighting much faster, much more effective, and with far less risk of injury. And there you have it. We've gone through flexion, extension, and rotation. We have combined all three. I only did about 15 minutes. You can see it gets really exhausting, especially if you don't take breaks in between, and you're gonna build some real strength, endurance, and especially, very important, control over your hip and leg musculature in general. With that said, sadly, that's all the time I have left for you today. I still have work in half an hour, but hey, if you like the video and subscribe, and please check out other videos on this channel because we literally have new ones every single day. I'm not even joking. So until tomorrow, Captain Cairo, peace out.